um, millions of people standing in security lines,
Oh, absolutely.
taking off their shoes, unpacking their laptops, and just voluntarily submitting themselves to a very specific kind of modern stress.
Yeah, paying thousands of dollars for the privilege.
Exactly. Thousands of dollars to wake up at 3 in the morning, sit in a pressurized metal tube, and eventually sleep in a bed that isn't theirs. And we call this a vacation.
We do.
Usually, when we talk about travel, it's entirely framed around this concept of pure escape. Like you book a flight, you pick a destination, and the whole point is just to disconnect from your daily grind.
Right. I mean, that is the marketing promise, certainly. It is sold to us as this exit strategy from reality.
Yeah.
A brief window where the rules of your normal life are just temporarily suspended.
Exactly. But here's the thing. When you actually step back and look at the academic study of tourism, and I mean, really dig into the research behind why we migrate across the globe for fun, that escape route turns into a giant high definition mirror. We're looking at a landscape that isn't just about booking platforms or airline routes or infinity pools. It's a reflection of our deepest human nature.
It really is.
It reflects our personal anxieties, our global economic systems, our psychology, and our sociology.
It truly is the ultimate mirror. And what makes this such a fascinating space to explore is that tourism isn't just an industry. It's a massive, incredibly complex intersection of human behavior.
Yeah.
You have individuals making deeply emotional choices, colliding with massive economic forces, all inside host communities that are constantly shifting.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. Because if you're listening to this right now, whether you are actively planning your next getaway or you're just intensely curious about the weird quirks of human movement, understanding these hidden mechanisms of travel is going to permanently change the way you look at your next trip.
Oh, absolutely.
You will literally never look at a tour guide, a resort, or even your own packing habits the same way again. So we're exploring why we travel, how the places we visit actually evolve over time, and why studying tourism completely breaks the mold of traditional academic subjects.
Well, breaking the mold is the perfect way to phrase it, because to really grasp what is happening when we travel, we have to start with a concept from a researcher named John Tribe. He famously argued that tourism is what he calls an indiscipline.
An indiscipline. I love that term.
Right.
Because when I think of an academic discipline, I think of classical physics or mathematics. Like there are agreed upon rules, strict boundaries, and everyone generally agrees on how to measure things.
Yes, exactly. Those fields have rigid historical borders. But tourism doesn't have that luxury.
No.
Tourism is this incredibly fluid, chaotic space. It's a phenomenon where completely different ways of understanding the world, different ideologies, different methods of research, they are constantly crashing into each other. You have economists measuring profit margins, psychologists measuring stress relief, and anthropologists measuring cultural decay, all standing on the exact same beach.
But if it's an indiscipline, I mean, does that mean it's just total chaos? Can anyone just claim whatever they want about why people travel?
Well, it isn't chaos, but it does mean you have to be incredibly careful. There's another researcher, David Botterill, who pointed out something vital, which is that the assumptions in tourism studies are very often kept hidden.
Okay, how so?
So when someone hands you a study saying, tourists in Paris prefer luxury hotels, you can't just take it at face value. You have to stop and ask, which philosophical paradigm are we speaking from right now? Because the way the researcher defines what truth even is, well, that will completely change the results of their study.
Okay, I have to throw a flag on the play here.
Go for it.
Philosophical paradigms. Defining what truth is. Those are the kinds of phrases that usually make me want to slowly back out of a room.
Fair enough.
Can we ground this a bit? Like, what does that actually mean?
Let's break it down. When academics study anything, including your vacation, they wear certain philosophical lenses. They have an ontology, which is just a fancy word for what they believe reality actually is.
Right.
Is reality a hard, measurable fact, or is it something humans invent in their heads? And then they have an epistemology, which is how they go about getting knowledge about that reality. Are they using math, or are they using, say, poetry?
Got it. Okay, so ontology is what is real, and epistemology is how do I prove it?
Exactly.
So to understand the theories of why we travel, we first have to understand the lenses the researchers are wearing when they look at us.
Precisely. And there is a massive epistemological battleground in tourism. There are three main paradigms, basically three completely different ways of defining the truth of your vacation.
Let's walk through them. Because understanding these three lenses feels like getting the cheat codes to how the world actually views us when we pack a bag.
Yeah.
So the first one is the positivist paradigm, or the empirical analytic paradigm.
Mm.
This sounds like the most traditional math-heavy approach.
It is deeply traditional, and it remains the most dominant way tourism is managed today.
Oh, really?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at tourism policy, government reports, or massive corporate hotel chains, they are almost exclusively operating in the positivist paradigm.
Okay.
The core belief here is that tourism is something observable, measurable, and driven by causal relationships.
So under this lens, there is a single independent reality out there just waiting to be measured.
Yes. A positivist wants hard numbers. They want to know exactly how many people visited a city, what their average daily spend was, and what specific variables caused them to choose one destination over another.
Right.
They use well-designed surveys, economic models, and something called structural equation modeling.
Structural equation modeling. What does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, imagine a hotel brand wants to know why you keep coming back to them.
Okay.
A positivist researcher will build a complex mathematical model that takes your income, your past survey responses, the price of the room, and even the square footage of the lobby.
The lobby. Wow.
Yeah, and they will try to calculate a literal equation that predicts your loyalty. A famous example of this approach is Isaac Asimov's theory of planned behavior.
Okay.
It assumes that humans are largely rational actors. We weigh the costs, we look at our attitudes, and we make a measurable decision to book a flight.
I mean, I understand why a massive hotel chain needs that data, but I have a real problem with this approach if we're using it to understand the humanity of travel.
Right.
Isn't boiling down a life-changing, deeply emotional trip into a math equation incredibly reductionist?
It is.
Like, let's say a woman saves up for 10 years to travel to a small village in Ireland where her great-grandmother was born. She gets there, she stands in the cemetery, and she has this profound spiritual connection to her roots.
Yeah.
You cannot put that into a structural equation model and say, yes, maximum utility achieved for an expenditure of $2,000.
No, you can't. And you have just perfectly articulated the fatal flaw of the positivist paradigm.
Really?
Yeah, it is entirely reductionist. When you reduce a traveler's decision purely to financial cost-benefit analysis or standardized survey boxes, you completely strip away the symbolic, emotional, and historical depth of travel.
Exactly.
And this is exactly where John Tribe, the researcher who coined the indiscipline idea, makes a vital distinction. He talks about the difference between provable truth and proven truth.
Provable versus proving. Okay. How does that apply to the women in Ireland?
Well, the amount of money she spent on her rental car, the number of nights she stayed in the local bed and breakfast, that is a provable truth.
Right.
You can track it on a credit card statement. So the positivist paradigm focuses entirely on that because it's easy to measure. But just because something can be measured doesn't mean it's the most important aspect of the phenomenon.
Yeah.
The emotional transformation she experienced in that cemetery. That might be the profound proven truth of her journey. But because it can't be easily quantified on a spreadsheet, positivism essentially ignores it.
It produces a mountain of data, but it misses the soul of the trip, which leads us directly to the second philosophical lens, right? The interpretive or hermeneutic paradigm. So if positivism asks, how much money did they spend? What does the interpretive lens ask?
It asks, what meaning did they assign to this experience? It completely abandons the spreadsheet.
Oh, nice.
In the interpretive paradigm, reality isn't a single objective data set that exists outside of us. Reality is constructed. It is built through symbols, personal narratives, and human interactions.
So how do you research that? If you can't hand out a multiple choice survey, what are these researchers actually doing?
They are embedding themselves in the experience. They use methods like deep ethnography and participant observation.
Right.
Instead of looking at airline ticket data, an interpretive researcher is going to go hang out in a hostel kitchen in Bangkok for 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. They're going to sit on the floor, drink cheap beer with backpackers, and ask them deeply open-ended questions about their life choices, their anxieties, and what finding themselves actually means.
I got to say, that sounds significantly more interesting than running a statistical model.
Oh, it yields incredibly rich insights. Some of the biggest heavy hitters in tourism theory work in this paradigm. You have Eric Cohen exploring the internal phenomenology of tourist experiences, Dean McCannell diving into our desperate search for authenticity, and John Urry, who developed this brilliant concept called the tourist gaze.
The tourist gaze. That instantly makes me think of someone like Staring at the Eiffel Tower. What is the mechanism behind that?
So Uri argues that when a tourist looks at a landscape like the Eiffel Tower, they aren't just engaging in a neutral, natural act of seeing.
Okay.
The tourist is operating within a visual regime that has been heavily trained. Long before you ever step foot in Paris, your brain has been programmed by the culture industry. Movies, Instagram, travel brochures, novels, they have all taught you exactly how you're supposed to look at Paris and what Paris is supposed to mean.
Oh, wow. So when I finally get there, I'm not really seeing the actual messy modern city of Paris. I'm just projecting the romanticized Paris my brain was pre-programmed to want to see. And if Paris doesn't match that pre-programming, I get disappointed.
You do. The destination isn't just a place where people live and work. It becomes a space that is literally arranged to be looked at, specifically to match the expectations of your gaze.
That is wild to think about. It makes me question every photo I've ever taken on vacation. Was I capturing the place or was I just fulfilling a script?
Probably the scripts.
But as much as I love this approach, I could see where it might hit a wall. If everything is just about meaning and personal narrative, doesn't that get incredibly self-indulgent?
It definitely can. The great danger of the interpretive paradigm is over subjectivity.
Right.
If every single tourist experience is treated as a beautiful, unique snowflake that can only be understood in its specific context, well, it becomes almost impossible to build any kind of overarching theory.
Yeah.
But there is a much harsher critique of this lens. By getting totally lost in the magical meaning of a trip, these researchers can become completely blind to very harsh real-world issues.
Like the economics of it all.
Precisely. You get a researcher who is so busy interviewing a tourist about the profound spiritual awakening they're having on a luxury yoga retreat in Bali.
Right.
That the researcher completely ignores the fact that the local woman cleaning the yoga studio is making sub-minimum wage, has no labor rights, and can no longer afford rent in her own hometown because the retreat center drove up property values.
Oh, man.
The interpretive lens often completely obscures class, labor exploitation, and capital relations.
Yeah. You can't just talk about symbols and meaning when people are getting priced out of their homes.
Exactly.
Which is the perfect introduction to the third lens.
Yeah.
Right. The critical
Yeah,
paradigm.
Yes.
This is the lens that tackles those dark realities head on, isn't it?
Yes, the critical paradigm does not care about your spiritual awakening, and it doesn't care about the hotel's profit margins. It reads tourism strictly through the lens of power dynamics, inequality, and capitalist accumulation.
So it's very structural.
Very. Under this lens, tourism is never just a neutral act of having fun. It is an active process of commodifying space and exoticizing local identities for consumption.
So if we take that yoga retreat in Bali, how does the critical paradigm view it?
It views it as an act of extraction. It argues that modern capitalist society creates deeply alienated workers in the West. Those workers get burned out, so they travel to Bali seeking healing.
Right.
But the tourism industry just packages up local Balinese culture, slaps a price tag on it, and sells it back to the alienated worker as a commodity. The local culture is reduced to a backdrop for Western consumption.
That is incredibly heavy. And it instantly calls to mind the massive systemic issues we are seeing right now. Like entire historic city centers being hollowed out by short-term rental platforms.
Yeah.
Neighborhoods turning into ghost towns for locals because every apartment is an Airbnb. The critical paradigm is looking right at that.
It is the only paradigm equipped to fully analyze phenomena like over-tourism and platform capitalism. It forces us to ask, who actually owns the streets? Whose culture is being sold? And who is being displaced to make room for the tourist gaze?
Honestly, it makes me feel a profound sense of guilt about ever booking a flight again.
It can do that, yeah.
But I have to ask, does the critical paradigm have a blind spot too? Because if you look at literally everything through a hypercritical lens of exploitation, aren't you missing something?
You are. The major flaw of the critical paradigm is that the normative critique, like the outrage over inequality, sometimes completely overrides the empirical facts on the ground.
Okay, how so?
A critical researcher might fly into a destination operating under the rigid assumption that all tourism is pure domination and exploitation. But if they actually talk to the locals, they might find that those communities are actively and happily leveraging tourism to build wealth, empower their youth, and preserve traditions that would have otherwise died out.
Oh, wow. So they strip the locals of their own agency by treating them purely as victims.
Exactly. And furthermore, the critical paradigm is famously weak on operational capacity.
Meaning what?
Meaning it is incredibly good at pointing out exactly what is broken in the system. But if a city planner comes to a critical theorist and says, okay, I have 3 million tourists arriving next summer, what specific policies should I enact today?
Right.
The theory often struggles to provide workable everyday solutions.
That makes sense. So we have these three entirely different ways of looking at the same tourist. Positivism measures their wallet. Interpretivism measures their soul. And the critical paradigm measures their footprint and the inequality they leave behind in their wake.
That's a great summary.
But it seems obvious that none of these lenses can survive on their own.
They absolutely cannot. And the field realized this. This brings us to a concept by Jafar Jafari, who outlined the evolution of tourism knowledge. He called it the platform approach.
The platform approach.
Yeah. Historically, tourism research started on an advocacy platform, just cheerleading the economic benefits. Then it moved to a warning platform, focusing only on the negative impacts. Then an adaptational platform, trying to find a middle ground. But today, we are on what he calls the knowledge-based platform.
What does that actually mean for the researchers?
It means that to truly understand tourism, you cannot be a purist. You need a multi-layered way of thinking. You need all three of these paradigms running simultaneously.
Okay.
You need the positivist to track the economic flow, the interpretivist to understand the cultural exchange, and the critical theorist to ensure the power dynamics remain equitable.
Okay, so that establishes the foundational ground rules. We know the philosophical lenses researchers wear. But if tourism was going to be its own field, if it didn't want to just be a minor subdepartment of sociology or a footnote in an economics textbook, it had to build its own unique frameworks.
Yes.
It had to create theories that speak specifically to the act of traveling.
Right. We call these the homegrown theories of tourism. These are models built from the ground up by tourism researchers to explain the evolution of destinations, the psychology of the traveler, and the collision between the two.
Let's dive into those homegrown theories, starting with one of the absolute most famous ones from our sources, the push-pull motivation model.
Ah, yes.
This was developed by Graham Dan in 1977 and expanded by John Crompton in 1979. When I first read about this, it made me think of a pressure valve and a vacuum.
I like that visual. Break down how the pressure and the vacuum work.
So the push factors are entirely internal. This is the pressure valve in your own mind. It is the stress of your morning commute, the burnout from your job, the bleak winter weather, or maybe a deeper internal need for prestige or self-actualization.
Mm-hmm.
These psychological pressures build up and they physically push you out the door of your own home. You just have to leave.
Right. The push factor explains why you travel.
Exactly. But it doesn't explain where you go. That is where the pull factors come in.
Yeah.
These are the external charms of the destination itself, acting like a vacuum, pulling you toward them.
Yes.
It's the pristine beaches of the Caribbean, the historic architecture of Rome, or the favorable exchange rate in Southeast Asia. So your internal stress pushes you away, and the destination's attributes pull you in.
It is an incredibly elegant framework, and you can see why it formed the backbone of tourist motivation research for decades. It makes intuitive sense. And going back to our paradigms, it is very easy for a positivist to design a survey around it. You just ask people to rank their stress levels and then rank how much they like beaches.
But Dan and Crompton built this model in the late 1970s. I imagine a guy in a brown suit looking at a travel agency brochure.
Yeah.
How does this hold up today?
Mm.
Because human motivation feels infinitely more complicated now.
And that is the modern critique. The push-pull model is brilliant, but it is far too static for the world we live in today.
Yeah.
It treats motivation as a neat, sequential, a logical process. First, I feel stressed, then I look for a beach. But think about how the digital landscape, what researchers call the visibility economy, has completely blown that sequence up.
Are we talking about the algorithm? Because I'm picturing someone doom scrolling on TikTok at 11 p.m.
Exactly. Imagine you are doom scrolling. You aren't consciously thinking, I am stressed, I need a vacation. You are just looking at your phone. Suddenly, the algorithm feeds you a highly curated, hyper-aesthetic video of a cliffside hotel in Santorini.
Right.
The music is perfect. The lighting is flawless. In that exact moment, the external pull of the destination is actively manufacturing your internal push to escape. The destination reached into your living room and created the desire before you even knew you wanted to leave.
Wow, the vacuum actually built the pressure valve. The line between internal desire and external attraction is completely gone.
Yeah.
And beyond just the algorithm, there is the performative aspect of travel now. People aren't just pushed by a need to relax, they are pushed by a need to brand themselves. They go to Santorini specifically to post the photo to prove they are the kind of person who goes to Santorini.
Precisely. The classic language of just needing a break fails to capture the deeply entangled performative nature of the visibility economy. But the push-pull model remains a vital baseline.
Right. Moving from why we leave to who we are when we travel. That brings us to another foundational homegrown theory, tourist typologies, developed by Eric Cohen.
Yes, Cohen's work is essential.
He wanted to break away from this snobby academic idea that all tourists are just one giant homogenous swarm of uncultured people in matching visors ruining historical sites. He actually categorized them.
Right. Cohen recognized that the tourist is not an abstract mass. Travel behavior is deeply differentiated. So he broke travelers down into four main types: the institutionalized mass tourist, the individual mass tourist, the explorer, and the drifter.
The drifter sounds incredibly romantic, but also like the guy who inevitably asked to borrow money at a hostel. What is Cohen actually measuring with these four categories? What is the psychological scale here?
He is measuring the tension between two competing fundamental human needs: the need for safety and familiarity versus the search for novelty and strangeness.
Safety versus novelty. Okay, how does that map onto the four types?
Let's start on the extreme end of safety, the institutionalized mass tourist.
Yeah.
This person buys an all-inclusive package tour. They stay in a Western-style hotel chain, they eat familiar food, and they travel on a private air-conditioned bus. They are seeking maximum safety and minimum novelty. They want to see the foreign environment, but only through a protective, familiar bubble.
Makes sense. And the next step up.
The individual mass tourists, they still use the infrastructure of the tourism industry. Like, they book a nice hotel, but they aren't bound to a group tour.
Right.
They might rent a car and drive around a bit. They want a tiny bit more novelty, but they still want a guaranteed hot shower at the end of the day.
Then we get to the explorer.
The explorer actively tries to get off the beaten path. They want to interact with locals, speak the language, and eat the local food. But, and this is crucial, they still retain a safety net. If they get sick, they are going to a modern clinic. They want authenticity, but not the harsh realities of it.
Which leaves the drifter on the extreme end of novelty.
Exactly. The drifter shuns the tourism industry entirely. No itinerary, no pre-booked hotels. They immerse themselves entirely in the host culture, living exactly as the locals do, taking on odd jobs to survive. Maximum novelty, minimum safety.
It's an amazing breakdown. But looking at modern travelers, I see a huge problem with these rigid boxes.
What's that?
Human identity today is completely hybrid. Like, let's take a hypothetical millennial. One year, they're exhausted from work, so they book an institutionalized mass market, all-inclusive resort in Mexico just to lie by a pool and turn their brain off.
Sure.
The very next year, they take a sabbatical and go full drifter, backpacking solo through the Andes.
You don't even have to look year to year. Look at a single day. A person might sleep in a 5-star, highly insulated luxury hotel, but then spend their afternoon taking a gritty, unscripted street food tour in a chaotic local market. They are moving between typologies within hours.
So the critique is that the boundaries are way too porous now.
Yes. Typologies were historically vital because they forced researchers to see tourists as individuals. But today, they are considered too fixed. Furthermore, these categories were built largely by observing affluent Western travelers, which totally fails to capture the massive, nuanced differences in how people from emerging economies travel globally today.
That tension you mentioned, the search for something real, like the explorer wanting to get off the beaten path, that leads us perfectly to what might be the most famous concept in all of tourism sociology, Dean McCannell's theory of staged authenticity, published in 1973.
This is a monumental concept. McCannell was operating largely in that critical and interpretive space. He argued that modern individuals feel deeply alienated by the repetitive, mechanized nature of their daily lives.
Yeah.
Because their normal life feels hollow, they go on vacation desperately searching for the real. They want to see how other people genuinely live.
But the tourism industry is a multi-billion-dollar machine. It isn't stupid. It knows what we want.
Exactly. The industry knows you're looking for the real, so it actively stages this reality for you. To explain this, McCannell borrowed from Irving Goffman's sociological concepts of the front region and the back region.
The front region and the back region, like a theater.
Precisely like a theater. The front region is the stage. It is the neatly packaged cultural performance put on explicitly for the visitors. Think of a Hawaiian luau at a mega resort. It is beautiful, it is entertaining, but it is a performance.
And the back region?
The back region is actual local life. It is where the performers go after the show, take off their costumes, check their phones, and live their normal, unstaged lives.
So the tourist, especially Cohen's explorer type, is constantly trying to bypass the front region. They want to peek behind the curtain to find the real culture.
Yes, but here is the brilliant, tragic irony McCannell points out. The industry is so clever that it will often create a fake back region.
A fake back region. What does that look like?
Think of a restaurant that boasts an open kitchen. The management knocks down a wall so you, the diner, can watch the chefs cook. You feel like you are getting an authentic, behind-the-scenes look at the culinary process.
Right.
You feel like you are in the back region. But the truth is, the really messy prep work, the swearing, the chaos, the actual raw reality is still happening down in a basement prep kitchen you can't see. The open kitchen is just a deeper, more sophisticated layer of the stage. Destinations do this constantly. They design experiences to feel gritty and undiscovered when in reality, they are heavily curated.
That is fascinating. But I have to challenge the core premise here.
Go ahead.
McCannell assumes that we are always desperately searching for objective authenticity. But do we always care if it's real? What if I actively want the fake?
What do you mean?
Like, if I take my family to a massive, heavily themed amusement park, or if I go skate the Venetian in Las Vegas and ride a gondola down a chlorine canal, I'm perfectly aware that it is fake. I am explicitly paying for the simulation.
That is a brilliant point, and it is the exact center of the postmodern critique of McCannell's work. Postmodern theorists argue that the strict binary of real versus fake is totally outdated. First of all, it's essentialist. It assumes a culture is a static museum piece, when in reality, cultures are alive and constantly performing and reinventing themselves.
And second of all, tourists aren't always looking for historical truth. Sometimes they just want to play. They enjoy the hyper reality.
Exactly. But McCannell's theory didn't die, it evolved. Researchers realized that if the authenticity isn't found in the object, if the Las Vegas canal is fake, the authenticity must exist somewhere else. They shifted from objective authenticity to existential authenticity.
Existential authenticity, meaning the realness is inside me.
Yes. Existential authenticity argues that the realness of a vacation is found in the lived experience, not the historical accuracy of the building you're standing in.
I like that.
Even if the gondola in Vegas is made of fiberglass, the spontaneous laughter you share with your spouse while riding it is 100% authentically real. You feel more like your true self in that moment than you do sitting in traffic on a Tuesday. The authenticity is your internal state of being.
That is a profound pivot. It takes the pressure off the destination to be a perfect museum. Okay, let's zoom out from the mind of the traveler and look at the physical places we travel to. Our next homegrown theory maps the lifespan of a vacation spot. It's the tourism area life cycle, or TEL-LC, developed by Richard Butler in 1980.
This is arguably one of the most practically influential models ever created in tourism geography. Butler proposed that destinations are not static. They evolve over time in a biological, almost inevitable life cycle.
Walk us through the cycle. Let's imagine a completely hypothetical, untouched beach town somewhere. How does it evolve?
It starts with the exploration stage. Only a tiny handful of intrepid travelers, Cohen's drifters, find the beach. There are no hotels, no infrastructure. The interaction with locals is very intimate.
But the drifters tell their friends, and we move to stage 2.
Stage 2 is involvement. The number of visitors slowly grows, and the locals realize there is money to be made. A local family opens a small guest house. Another opens a cafe. The community starts actively catering to the guests.
Which inevitably attracts bigger money, leading to stage 3.
Development. This is when the destination fundamentally changes. Outside capital flows in. International developers buy up the beachfront to build massive resorts. The local culture becomes commodified into that staged authenticity. The sheer number of tourists now equals or exceeds the local population.
And then we hit consolidation.
Consolidation is when the destination is a fully mature, globally recognized brand. The growth rate slows down, but the absolute numbers are staggering. The local economy is entirely dependent on tourism.
And the final stage.
Stagnation. The carrying capacity has been breached. The beaches are polluted, traffic is a nightmare, and the destination is no longer fashionable.
Wow.
From stagnation, the destination faces a critical juncture. It will either go into steep decline, losing tourists to the next new hotspot, or it will require massive, expensive intervention by the government to achieve rejuvenation.
It is an incredible narrative arc. You can look at almost any major destination and try to plot where they are on that curve. But I can already hear the critical paradigm researchers screaming about how linear this is.
And they would be right to scream. The major critique of TLC is that it assumes every destination follows a predetermined biological destiny. But reality is chaotic and nonlinear.
Give me an example of how the cycle breaks.
Look at the modern world. A global pandemic can instantly force a consolidated destination into total decline overnight. Conversely, a sleepy town in the exploration phase can completely bypass involvement and development and instantly explode into chaotic stagnation because a massive travel influencer posted a viral TikTok and suddenly low-cost airlines rep flights there. Digital platforms shatter the slow, linear growth model. TLC is a fantastic heuristic, a great way to organize our thinking about time and space, but it is dangerous to use it as an unbreakable law.
And as that destination grows, the people who actually live there have to endure the consequences. Which brings us to our final homegrown theory, host-guest relations, mapped out by Doxey's Iridex, the irritation index. This looks at the psychological toll on the locals.
Yes, Doxey developed this in the 1970s, and it tracks perfectly alongside Butler's life cycle model. Doxey proposed that as tourist numbers increase, the host community's emotional attitude moves through predictable stages.
Let's track the emotional descent of our hypothetical beach town locals.
It starts with euphoria. The first tourists arrive, bringing foreign currency, creating jobs, and validating the beauty of the town. The locals are thrilled. But as the town hits that development stage, the emotion shifts to apathy. Tourists are no longer exciting guests. They are just a mundane fact of life and economic unit.
And when the town hits consolidation, apathy turns sour.
It turns to annoyance. The locals realize they can't find parking in their own town. The price of groceries has doubled. Their favorite quiet spot is overrun. And if the government doesn't step in to manage this, annoyance metastasizes into outright antagonism.
Antagonism. This is what we are seeing in real time in cities across Europe. People holding signs telling tourists to go home or spraying water guns at people eating at outdoor cafes. It's the breaking point of over-tourism.
Exactly. Doxey's Iridex was incredibly prescient. It proved that local reaction isn't just a simple economic equation. It is deeply tied to spatial crowding, cultural pressure, and the disruption of the rhythm of daily life.
But just like the other models, it has a glaring flaw, right?
Oh.
It treats the entire local population as a monolith. If I own 3 luxury hotels in the center of town, my euphoria phase is probably going to last forever. I am making millions. But if I am a local teacher who just got evicted from my apartment so my landlord could turn it into a short-term rental, I am rocketing straight to antagonism on day one.
You nailed it. You absolutely cannot treat a host community as a single unified voice. A community is deeply fractured by class, age, property ownership, and geography. The Iridex is a brilliant early warning system, but it is far too schematic to capture the intense internal class conflicts happening within the host community itself.
Okay, so we have these brilliant homegrown theories, but what I am noticing is that every single one of them eventually hits a wall. The push-pull model struggles with the digital age. Typologies can't handle hybrid identities. TLC can't handle viral chaos. If tourism's own theories have limits, what happens next?
What happens next is that researchers realize tourism is simply too complex to be handled by one field. It involves individual psychology, social power dynamics, spatial geography, and macroeconomics, all firing at the exact same time. So the indisciplined started aggressively borrowing lenses from older, more established sciences to fill the gaps.
Let's look at what we've borrowed. We already briefly touched on psychology, specifically Azen's theory of planned behavior. We talked about how positivist researchers use it to build mathematical models of our decisions.
Yes. To recap the mechanism, Azen argues that your behavior is dictated by your intention, and your intention is formed by 3 rational pillars: your personal attitude toward the trip, the subjective norms, which is what your friends think about the trip, and your perceived behavioral control, meaning, do you have the money and time to take the trip?
It is a hyperlogical model, but the critique is that the human brain, especially when planning a vacation, is deeply irrational. And the text points out a specific phenomenon that proves this: the intention-behavior gap.
This is fascinating. The intention behavior gap is the chasm between what we believe we will do and what we actually do when we enter our credit card number.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, let's say you survey a traveler. They state they have a strong positive attitude towards sustainability. They intend to be an eco-friendly traveler. They want to stay in a locally owned, solar-powered eco lodge.
But then reality sets in.
Exactly. When it comes time to actually book, cognitive fatigue sets in. The Eco Lodge is a 3-hour bumpy bus ride from the airport. It costs 30% more, and they only have 5 days of paid time off.
Right.
So, despite their deeply held sustainable intentions, they book a cheap flight on a heavily polluting airline and stay at an international mega resort because it is frictionless. The psychological model often overestimates our rationality and severely underplays the structural barriers that dictate our actual actions.
Our ideals are quickly defeated by convenience. What about sociology? To fix the flaws of Doxyzeridex, the emotional model of the locals, we borrowed social exchange theory, specifically adapted by John App in 1992.
Yes, social exchange theory abandons the idea of emotional stages. Instead, App suggests a highly utilitarian approach. He argues that locals will tolerate or support tourism if, and only if, they perceive that the economic and social benefits they receive outweigh the costs they have to endure.
This literally sounds like treating a human community like a corporate ledger book. You put jobs and infrastructure on the asset column and traffic and noise on the liability column. If the math stays in the black, everyone is happy. But doesn't this completely ignore the emotional, irrational ties people have to the place they live?
Spot on. It is intensely utilitarian, and that is its greatest weakness. You cannot reduce complex human relationships and cultural identity to a simple cost-benefit calculation.
Right.
This model completely ignores concepts like spatial justice. A local community might be making a massive profit on paper, the tax revenues are through the roof, but they might still deeply, viscerally resent tourism because they feel a moral outrage that their cultural heritage has been turned into a theme park. Social exchange theory has a very hard time measuring the pain of cultural loss.
Which brings us to geography. To try to figure out when a destination is truly full, we borrowed the concept of carrying capacity.
Carrying capacity tries to define the absolute physical, ecological, and social limits of a specific destination. It asks the ultimate question: how many human bodies can physically fit in this space before the ecosystem collapses or the social fabric tears apart?
But let me guess, it is completely impossible to establish a fixed magic number. You can't just say, this beach can hold exactly 5,000 people and person number 5,001 will cause a riot.
Exactly. It's an illusion of control. A beach's capacity is wildly dynamic. It changes based on the season. It changes based on the behavior of the tourists. Are they 5,000 quiet bird watchers or 5,000 rowdy spring breakers?
Huge difference.
Those two groups impact the capacity entirely differently. And most importantly, capacity depends on the quality of local management.
How so?
If a city invests heavily in brilliant waste management, efficient public transport, and crowd control architecture, their carrying capacity artificially skyrockets. This is why Colin Hunter, another key researcher, argued that sustainable tourism shouldn't be about searching for a fixed technical threshold. Instead, we need an adaptive paradigm that constantly shifts and responds to the unique, changing context of the destination.
So we have explored the epistemological battlegrounds. We have walked through the homegrown theories of how destinations evolve and how authenticity is staged. We have examined the borrowed lenses of psychology, sociology, and geography.
We have covered a lot.
For the final section of this deep dive, I want to zoom all the way in. I want to leave the macro level and focus entirely on you, the individual traveler listening right now. How does your specific personality and your specific cultural background dictate the ticket you just purchased?
This is where tourism studies become highly granular. Researchers utilize advanced psychological and anthropological adaptations to segment us into incredibly specific profiles.
Let's start with the psychological profile. One of the most famous models adapted for tourism is the Big Five personality traits.
Right, often remembered by the acronym OCEAN. This model moves away from putting people in rigid Cohen-style boxes. Instead, it scores you along a spectrum of 5-dimensional traits. Where you fall in these spectrums heavily influences not just where you choose to go, but how you behave once you arrive.
Let's break down the mechanisms behind each trait, starting with extroversion.
Extroversion measures sociability, external energy, and the desire for intense interaction. In a tourism context, a highly extroverted person is biologically drawn to high social density. They want to be in the center of the crowd.
So the people going to Ibiza.
Exactly. They are the ones booking trips to massive music festivals, staying in bustling city centers, and actively seeking out nightlife. They recharge by absorbing the energy of the crowd.
Conversely, someone who scores very low on extroversion, an introvert, is seeking low social density. Their idea of a nightmare is a music festival. Their ideal trip is a secluded cabin in the woods where the only interaction is with a barista once a day.
Exactly. Now, the second trait is agreeableness. This measures your baseline for empathy, cooperation, and your desire for social harmony.
How does being empathetic translate into packing a suitcase?
Highly agreeable tourists are deeply concerned with cultural sensitivity. They actively want to ensure their presence doesn't negatively impact the host community. Because of this, they are drawn to volunteer tourism, deep cultural immersion, and most importantly, they show a statistically higher propensity for eco-friendly and sustainable behaviors. They will take the 3-hour bus ride to the Eco Lodge because they want their trip to be harmonious for everyone involved.
That makes perfect sense. Trait number 3 is conscientiousness.
Conscientiousness is all about discipline, organization, and a deep psychological need for control. A highly conscientious traveler hates ambiguity. They need a detailed hour-by-hour itinerary. They prefer highly developed, safe destinations and often lean toward institutionalized package tours because the standards of quality are guaranteed.
These are the friends who send out a color-coded spreadsheet for a 4-day weekend trip to Miami. We mock them, but we completely rely on them to make sure we don't miss our flight.
Exactly. Now, the fourth trait is one that has become incredibly critical for researchers to understand in the modern era: neuroticism.
Neuroticism, this relates to anxiety, right?
Yes. It measures emotional instability, stress reactivity, and general anxiety levels. In a travel context, a person scoring high in neuroticism is intensely risk averse. They need high security and they aggressively avoid uncertainty.
I imagine this became a massive field of study during the pandemic.
It was the single most important variable. Understanding neuroticism allows researchers to predict how global tourist flows will react during a crisis, whether it's a pandemic, a geopolitical war, or a natural disaster. Tourist neuroticism dictate a rapid, immediate retreat to safety. They are highly sensitive to perceived risk, and their travel habits will freeze instantly when the world gets unpredictable.
Wow. And finally, we have the O in ocean, openness to experience.
This is perhaps the strongest predictor for non-traditional alternative travel. Openness involves intellectual curiosity, creativity, and a hunger for the unknown. Individuals scoring high here actively seek out the unfamiliar.
Like trying new foods.
Yeah, they are the ones drawn to extreme ecotourism, trying bizarre local foods, and wandering through unstructured environments. To use McCannell's terms, they are desperately searching for the complex back region.
It is a phenomenal tool for understanding ourselves. But I assume, just like everything else we've discussed, relying solely on personality tests has its blind spots.
It does. While the Big Five is fantastic for psychographic segmentation, allowing companies to market specific trips to specific personalities, it can be highly reductionist if you ignore the real world. You might take this test and your profile screams, "You are an explorer with exceptionally high openness." But if your bank account is empty, or you hold a passport from a country with severe visa restrictions, your personality doesn't matter. You aren't going anywhere.
Right.
Personality models often focus so much on the brain that they ignore the massive structural and economic constraints that actually govern global mobility.
Which provides the absolute perfect transition to our final theoretical framework. If psychology focuses entirely on the internal workings of the individual's brain, anthropology focuses on how that individual navigates the external social structures around them. The text introduces us to a fascinating anthropological framework called the grid group cultural theory.
Yes. Developed originally by the anthropologist Mary Douglas, this theory is used to map human behavior on a graph with two intersecting axes, the grid axis and the group axis.
Okay, let's unpack the axis before we place people on them. What does the grid measure?
The grid axis measures structural constraints. It asks, how much are your daily behaviors restricted by external rules, formal norms, and top-down hierarchies? If you are high grid, you live a life governed by strict rules and clear roles. If you are low grid, you value absolute freedom from rules and external control.
And the group axis?
The group axis measures your collective affiliation. It asks, how closely tied are you to a community or a collective identity? If you are a high group, you prioritize the well-being and consensus of the collective. If you are a low group, you are highly individualistic and self-reliant.
When we cross these two axes, we get 4 very distinct quadrants, 4 types of travelers. Let's walk through them. Start with high grid, high group. Someone who respects strict rules, but also deeply values the collective.
That is the hierarchist. They need order and they want the safety of the herd. In the tourism world, this translates perfectly to the classic cruise ship passenger or the guided bus tour. They want a highly structured experience where someone in authority, the captain or the tour guide, manages the group safely.
Contrast that with the exact opposite, low grid, low group. Someone who rejects all rules and rejects the collective.
That is the individualist. They seek personal freedom, competition, and individual achievement. They view uncertainty not as a risk to be mitigated, but as an opportunity for personal triumph. This is your extreme adventure tourist, the solo alpinist climbing a dangerous peak. They don't want a guide and they don't want a group holding them back.
What about low grid, high group? Someone who hates top down rules but loves community.
That is the egalitarian. They reject formal hierarchy, but they deeply value ethics, mutual respect, and grassroots community. In tourism, this is the prime demographic for responsible, community-based ecotourism. They want to travel to connect with locals, but on an equal footing. They are highly conscious of their environmental impact and want to support the collective good without staying in a corporate, hierarchical hotel.
And the fourth quadrant, high grid, low group, a life of strict rules, but no community support.
The fatalist. They feel their lives are entirely controlled by external forces and rigid structures, but they lack the safety net of a group. Their travel behavior is usually passive. They are the person dragging their feet on an obligatory corporate business trip, or the teenager forced to go on a family vacation they hate. They go where they are told to go, governed by circumstances completely beyond their control.
It's an amazing matrix.
Yeah.
But modern researchers looked at this and realized it was missing something crucial about how people live today, right? They had to add a fifth category.
They did. They added the autonomous or reflexive individual. This type doesn't fit neatly into any of the four quadrants because they are actively manipulating the grid and the group to suit their needs. They are highly flexible and constantly shifting their values based on deep, conscious reflection.
Give me an example of the autonomous traveler.
The modern digital nomad is the perfect example. They reject the high grid rules of a 9-to-5 corporate job, but they will happily embrace the high group community of a co-working space in Bali for 3 months and then shift to a solo, low group individualist trek in Patagonia the next month. They curate their structural constraints dynamically.
Okay, we have covered an immense, staggering amount of ground today. We have traveled from the deep philosophical battlegrounds of ontology and epistemology through the homegrown models of destination life cycles and staged authenticity into the borrowed ledgers of sociology, all the way down to a psychological breakdown of why your specific personality makes you book a cruise instead of a solo hike.
It's a lot to process.
It is. Bringing all these threads together, what is the ultimate takeaway? What does this massive indiscipline of theories actually mean for the future of how we study travel?
The absolute core takeaway from our source material is that theoretical competence is not about memorizing a list of theories. It is not about declaring that the positivist paradigm is right and the critical paradigm is wrong. It is about knowing which specific theory works for which specific problem.
Yeah.
A 1980s linear life cycle model will completely fail to explain a destination in the era of platform capitalism unless it is heavily adapted. The push-pull motivation model is useless today if it doesn't account for the Instagram algorithm manufacturing our desires.
So there is no grand unified theory of tourism waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. The future of tourism studies requires running multiple conflicting theories simultaneously in a highly context-sensitive way. We have to be able to measure the economic impact of a digital simulation while analyzing the post-pandemic risk behaviors of the traveler while confronting the structural inequality of the local host community all at once. Jafari's knowledge-based platform demands that we look through every lens we have available.
Which brings this directly back to you, the listener. The next time you feel that deep, sudden itch to open a new tab and browse flight deals, just stop for a second. Ask yourself some questions. Is this a genuine internal push to escape burnout, or is an algorithm acting as an external pull in disguise?
Right.
Are you looking for the structured safety of a hierarchist or the unscripted freedom of an individualist? And when you look at a beautiful photo of a distant city, whose gaze has trained your brain to find it beautiful,
it genuinely changes everything when you realize that your private personal vacation is actually a node in a massive multi-layered global phenomenon. You aren't just taking a break, you are participating in the indiscipline.
It really does. And I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on. We talked at length about Dean McCannell and the idea that we travel because we feel alienated by our modern mechanized lives.
Mm-hmm.
We go on vacation and we desperately seek out that staged authenticity to feel a connection to something real.
Mm.
But if tourism truly is the ultimate mirror, an indiscipline that just reflects our deepest human insecurities and desires back at us, what does our current overwhelming obsession with finding the authentic on a 2-week vacation say about the authenticity of the everyday lives we're living at home?
That is the exact question the mirror forces us to confront. If you have to fly 5,000 miles to feel real, what are you doing the rest of the year?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the theories of tourism. Keep unpacking your bags, keep looking past the front region, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.